Huge.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan podcast by night, all day.
Well, and greetings to you, Mr. Rogan.
Well, you always have to bring you in when the world's fucked.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Yeah,
I bring you in and everything's great.
That would be, you know what, I'd look forward to that. And we can just talk about other things, but...
You're my go-to guy
yeah.
when there's international conflict, and I'm like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah, I appreciate that because we have some conflict.
That's what I hear.
God, yeah.
Yeah, so what the fuck is going on? Like, tell me the real deal. What's happening?
Well, there's something happening in the Middle East. It's taking everybody's eye off the ball with what's happening in Ukraine, which is amazing. 7 October happened with that incredible medieval slaughter by Hamas.
Test.
And I was amazed at how quickly, right? I mean, I guess I know that people have attention deficit disorder, but you didn't see anything about Ukraine or the conflict for the next couple of weeks, right? It took them that long to then think, okay, well, we still got this thing going on over here, right? People dying as Putin continues to operate as meat grinder for the Russian soldiers, and so that was incredible. But then timing-wise, the other thing that I thought was amazing was despite the brutality of the 7 October attacks, and Hamas knew this was going to happen, but the number of days that it took to turn the narrative around, right? So everybody was horrified at how terrible the slaughter was, and then within a matter of days, it was like, no, it's Israel's fault,
right?
And
how did that happen?
Hamas knew that was going to happen because that's what they count on, which is why they embed themselves with civilians. It's why they put, their operation centers, their tunnels, their weapon stockpiles. That's why they put it all underneath civilian infrastructure, like the Al Shifa Hospital has been in the news lately and other places, because they know that they're going to end up with dead Palestinians, right? And that's kind of, it sounds wrong, but it's kind of their currency, right? It's kind of what they expect, and they don't give a shit. I mean, you can see just by the way that Hamas is governed, if you can call it that, Gaza, for, what is that, it's new math for me, but since 2006, really. They kicked out Fatah, they kicked out the Palestinian Authority in 2007. So you can tell by the fact that they've done nothing to improve the lives of Palestinians. They don't give a shit about Palestinians, right? That's not their point. Their point is the extermination of Israel, because they're overlord in the Iranian regime. That's their purpose in life, too. So it's, I hate to start off on a really, really, cynical rant, but they know, because they're clever. They've got a good public relations group, if you want to call it that. They understand how international media works. They know that it won't take much time for condemnation of Israel, because you end up with dead Palestinian civilians, which is incredibly sad, right? It's very sad for the Palestinian people, right? Their plight is legitimately awful, right? But to imagine somehow that Hamas cares about them, or has been some sort of benevolent, I know it's going to be a word, that's a fucking word, benevolent governing body of Gaza is ridiculous. So, I don't know. I guess it's hard to tell where I stand on this issue.
It's so strange that some people, particularly like these really crazy leftists, have gone as far as saying they were happy when the slaughter took place. I've seen that.
You had staffers in the UN's refugee office. Not, I mean, again, keep it in perspective, not a lot of them. Maybe in private they were, but you had some staffers celebrating openly, right, through social media about what happened on the 7th of October, right? You've got, college campuses filled with useful idiots who are happy to, spout the Hamas narrative. And you've got protests in the streets, and some people, earnestly, hoping for a better situation for Palestine. Other folks couldn't find, Gaza on a map. If you took a map and shoved it up their ass, it wouldn't work, right? They don't care. It's the latest thing. So I don't want to put all the protesters in one camp, because, some are legitimately working to better the lives of Palestinians, and yes, you can feel awful about what happens with the civilians. But I'm not sure what people expect Israel to do after what happened on the 7th of October, and after Hamas continued to say, well, we're just going to keep doing this. Right? It wasn't like they said, well, there you go, that was a one-off. No, they said, we're going to keep doing this, because that's their purpose in life, is the destruction of Israel. You believe people sometimes when they say things, and that's what they mean. It sucks.
That's something that people need to understand, that they are embedding these troops, and they're embedding these weapon stockpiles and all these different things in civilian infrastructure.
Yeah, there was a lot of, I think there has been a lot of skepticism about that. People saying, no, that's Israel's excuse for targeting civilians. And now we're getting some pretty good evidence that that's not the case.
Isn't a lot of that stuff blown up underneath?
Well, like, they were just releasing evidence of what they found when they went into the TC Children's Hospital in Gaza. And again, weapon stockpiles, disturbingly makeshift rooms or holding cells, so it appears as if they could have been holding some hostages there, moved them before the IDF got in. But they've done the same with Al Shifa. They've gone into this, and that's a large hospital compound. And they have been saying for years that they use Al Shifa as essentially the command central point for the military structure there for Hamas, and also for weapon stockpiles. I mean, you can't be more cynical as an organization like Hamas than to be storing ammunition and weapons underneath a children's hospital, as an example. I mean, so yeah, I think the best thing that can happen. Sounds weird to say that in a situation like this, but yeah, Israel needs to be very transparent. They need to provide as much evidence of this to try to shift that narrative. At least the people who aren't rabid about this, but have kind of jumped on the Free Palestine bandwagon because they like to feel righteous, right? So at least some of those people you can shift off of that narrative by providing evidence, by being transparent. So hopefully that's what the idea does. The U.S. has come out and said, look, we back up that intelligence. We have independent corroboration that they've been using Al Shifa and other hospitals, Hamas has, for their personnel, for their stockpiles. The reality is it's not going to change much of the narrative. I've been surprised by apparently how many anti-Semitic bigots were just like in the shadows waiting for an opportunity to jump out.
Crazy, right?
Yeah.
The open anti-Semitism online is so shocking. People chanting in the streets, "Death to the Jews!" Like what?
Yeah, from a variety of quarters.
Yeah,
in 2023. Yeah, and I guess it's naive to think that maybe we didn't have that problem anymore. But
Jewish people have always been saying it, and a lot of people have been saying, "Oh, you guys are exaggerating."
Yeah.
And now I guess everybody has to shut the fuck up about that. It's like it's not only they're not exaggerating, they're kind of underplaying it.
Yeah, I think they were definitely underplaying it. But I think that if you look at
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. For many of us, the holiday season means more travel, more shopping. This episode is brought to you.
Again, if you look at what's happening here in America, right, there's layers to it, right? You get Rashida Tlaib, the Palestinian American in Congress, and she's a member of whatever they call it, the Squad, and so she comes out and she's not, she's fairly rabid, right? Meaning what she's saying about it is not particularly eloquent, right? And so she gets censored because she's just like out there spouting almost what appears to be pro-Hamas or making some sort of equivalency, right? Saying,
She tweeted the incorrect story.
Yes.
About the bombing of the hospital being the responsibility of Israel, and it wasn't.
That's actually that's a great point because the attacks took place on 7 October, and then a few days after there was that explosion at the hospital, and not only Rashida Tlaib, but
The New York Times,
major news outlets took the word of Hamas, the group that had just days before conducted this awful slaughter. Right? They took their word and said, "Oh yeah, it was an Israeli airstrike targeting a hospital."
Yeah.
And they went with it.
Yeah.
You think, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Not only that,
yeah.
it hit the parking lot. It didn't even hit the hospital.
Yeah.
And there wasn't 500 people dead.
No, there was no journalistic curiosity. There was no thought that said, well, maybe before we run with the word of a terrorist organization that just proves how medieval they are, maybe we should do our own independent checking. But I mean, again, in today's world, everybody wants to beat the clock and be the first with a story.
How do you do that when you're in the New York Times?
Apparently
it's
not
when you're a
difficult.
congresswoman.
Yeah. Yeah, so she comes out, and I guess the point is she's one layer of this, right? Of this sort of anti-Semitism, and she's trying to couch it in, I'm not an anti-Semite. I'm drawing some sort of moral equivalency between Hamas and Israel. And I get it; it's a massively complicated history, right? There's nothing more complicated than the history of Palestine and Israel, and the settlements and all the rest of it, and no one's probably ever going to solve it. But then you got the campus activity, and again, those are youthful people that like to feel righteous about things. You got Barack Obama, right, going on a podcast talking about this.
Whose podcast is he on?
What was that called? Pod Save America. But on that, he basically attempted to, well, he didn't attempt, he did, but in a very subtle, very sophisticated way, more sophisticated than others who get out there and scream from the river to the sea. He talked about this, like, okay, well, it was an unbearable situation for the Palestinians, which implies that, it's kind of, he's not justifying it, I guess, in a sense, but people will read that into it, right?
Yeah.
And that's dangerous in itself, right? Because, well, he's listened to, right? And he's beloved. I guess I could use the word beloved. Anyway, so I guess what I'm saying is there's layers of this anti-Semitism, or there's layers of this excusing what took place, while not, again, I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but that's what they're doing, right? And by calling for a ceasefire, as an example, if you call for a ceasefire, right, then you're basically saying, I'm okay with the status quo. Because a ceasefire is not going to lead to a two-state solution. It's not going to lead to, stability. It's going to lead to more violence, more terrorism, right? And the only people that win in a situation like that would be Hamas and the Iranian regime. So, I think it's, again, it's the most complicated issue of our time and for generations, right? And I don't think there's going to be a solution. So from Israel's perspective, they're saying, all right, we understood that international condemnation would be coming as soon as we try to deal with the problem. We have to deal with the problem, though, because who else is going to do it for them? Who else is going to help them? Clearly, there's a lot of people who have no interest in that. So I think they're feeling if we can degrade Hamas sufficiently, I don't think you ever destroy a terrorist organization, or you're certainly not going to get terrorism down to nothing, right? It's not a zero-sum game. But if you can degrade it enough so that they can never govern again in Gaza, they can never, conduct their terrorist operations again, at least you've advanced the ball towards something that could be more stable. Right? Now, it depends on what backfills Hamas's governance of Gaza, and that's a massive question, right? But anyway.
Elon was on a podcast recently with Lex Friedman, and one of the things he was talking about was like, with every civilian Palestinian that dies, how many more members of Hamas have you created? And that's a very good point, right?
It's a very good point.
There's thousands of civilians have died now.
But Hamas has also spent years kind of shaping curriculum, right? Teaching children to hate Israel, teaching children that killing Jews is kind of your lot in life, right? So. Yes, I mean, but so then you're faced with this. What do? Do you keep them around? Do we allow them to keep doing what they're doing, or do you try to, remove that, cancel, right? And you try to say, okay, whatever comes in, maybe that's better. Look, it's not like the Palestinian people overwhelmingly support Hamas. There was a poll, believe it or not, doing polls out in Gaza, asking who is best served to represent the Palestinian people. Would it be Hamas or would it be Fatah? Would it be And only 30% of the people felt that Hamas was their answer. 40+% said neither. Right? So it's not as if the Palestinian people are all out there cheering for Hamas. Right? Clearly some are. But we have to imagine, what does it look like? At some point, the conflict ends. At some point, they are degraded sufficiently. At some point, international pressure is just to the point where they have to stop, I suppose. And then you have to, what does that look like? It can't be a long-term Israeli occupation. They don't want that. So, the U.S. steps in. That's what the U.S. administration always does. And they imagine that they've got an answer. And so they say, well, let's have the Palestinian Authority govern Gaza. Because the Palestinian Authority govern West Bank, of course. And we have this two-government situation because back in 06, I believe, Hamas violently kicked out Palestinian Authority. We're taking over Gaza. So they took over Gaza. West Bank is left to Palestinian Authority. So the U.S. is saying, well, we'll let Mahmoud Abbas and Palestinian Authority come in. Anthony Blinken goes over and talks to Abbas. They say, Israel is against the idea.
Why is Israel against the idea?
Well, they're saying in part. They're saying in part because, look, they're saying Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority haven't even bothered to condemn what took place on the 7th of October. Right? So they say, how can you then have the same group running? That's not a solution. That's not advancing the ball in any way. That's their point. The point of the Palestinian people is when you did that survey of who's best, capable and who deserves to represent Palestinian people. Yeah, Hamas only got about 30% of the vote. Fatah got only 20% of the vote. So it's not like they want them there either. But the U.S. is kind of wedging that into the scenario, saying, look, this is the way we go. Just kind of like, Biden comes in and says, well, we should have a pause. No, we should have a 3-day pause. We should. And they almost get a little petulant because Israel's not listening to them. And Israel, obviously gets a lot of support from the U.S. But this time is different. This time is, I think what happened on the 7th of October marks a complete sea change from their perspective. So they're going to do what they need to do from their perspective and move on. But that question again, what backfills what comes in behind, is critical. But nobody's got a good answer.
From an intelligence perspective, how did that October 7th thing not get detected? I mean, doesn't the IDF, don't they have agents embedded in Hamas? Don't they have like the most intense security system ever and surveillance system ever?
They do, yeah. And it was a massive intelligence failure. And in part, it was a very, I don't know if sophisticated is the wrong word, but in terms of the planning of this, if you're conducting an operation, if you're conducting any intelligence really concern, then the first thing you need to worry about is need to know. Right? So how do you limit information? How do you limit the dissemination of information about what you're doing? And that's just good OPSEC. That's good operational security. Now, that's what they did. They displayed extremely sophisticated, I suppose, operational security over this. Because you're right, there's human sources that the IDF and Shin Bet and others in Israel have within Gaza. There's the communications intercepts, signals intelligence. There's just general surveillance that they're doing of the region in terms of movements of goods. But most of that movement of goods happens underground. 300 miles of tunnels in Gaza that they built, using money, by the way, using money that was probably meant for clean water works and other infrastructure and improving schools and hospitals. That's a whole different angle to talk about. But
yeah.
I think the security side of things, by doing that, by limiting who knows about the operation, and because again, you could legitimately argue the political leadership of Hamas, they had a sense, I'm sure at some point they approved a large-scale operation, but the people who really knew about this were the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, which is the organization of the Iranian regime, and they're kind of the liaison partners for Hamas and Hezbollah. They manage a lot of the training issues, they funnel a lot of the money that goes to these organizations that are Iranian proxies, and so you can count on the fact that a limited number within the IRGC were aware of the planning and the training because they did train Hamas operatives in Iran prior to 7 October. So I think, it was simply a matter of them saying, all right, this cell will have knowledge of this during the course of training. These guys over here will know this. These people will know this. And maybe a handful of people will understand the full picture and will understand when we're going to do this. And it's all designed to keep it away from Israeli intelligence. And it was ridiculously successful in that regard. So, and also you could argue, intelligence is a human operation, or an endeavor. So you're going to have failures on occasion. You just don't want them to be this massive. There were occasional comments about the inclination of Hamas to do something bigger. No details, no specific details. And Hamas also spent a great deal of time leading up to this, years, convincing the Israeli government through their words, through their actions or lack of actions, that it was a new day and that what they're looking to do is create a different dynamic or relationship with the Israeli government. And so the Israeli government became complacent. And when they became complacent to some degree over Hamas and the fact that there hadn't been any strikes, there hadn't been any terrorist actions for a period of time, then what you saw was, then they kind of turned inward. When people talk about the political divisions within Israel, the fact that the government was in a bit of disarray and it was a little dysfunctional, a lot of arguments going on, that in part was because they had not the luxury, but the ability to kind of turn in on themselves because they didn't feel necessarily that threat outside was as bad as it had been, right? And they thought perhaps it's diminishing, perhaps Hamas is changing its tune, and that was a deliberate attempt by Hamas to lull them into that state. Right? And so there were a lot of things going on at the same time, but there's no way around it. It's a massive intelligence failure.
The most cynical and conspiratorial take on it is that they let it happen because this is the best way to destroy Hamas. They knew it was going to happen, so they allowed it to take place.
Yeah, that's pretty cynical. If you can get your head around that idea that they said, we're going to let Hamas or somehow encourage Hamas to come in and slaughter all these women, babies, children, men. I suppose that's, if someone can get there, then God bless them, that's their right. But I'm not buying it. I've seen intelligence failures before. I know it can happen. No matter how many cameras you got up, no matter how good your signals intelligence intercepts are, they dumb that down, right? I'm not calling anybody on the phone because I know you're going to pick that up, right? I'm not going to talk about this anyway. Right. I want to hand a note to my cousin, who runs a part of a battalion in Hamas. They got 24 battalions. So, but I'm going to keep that communication as stupid as I can. That's what Al Qaeda did, right? And then they dumbed it down, and it becomes much more difficult. They limit the number of sources who know about it. That limits your target pool of assets who can tell you something from a human perspective. And but again, I've seen some pretty wacky conspiracy theories come out of this in 7 October, right? And I'm not buying that one.
Yeah, the most conspiratorial was that Netanyahu was kind of on the way out with the people, and that this is the way for him to sort of galvanize everybody and get support and maintain power, and then do what he actually wanted to do, go in there and attack Hamas.
Yeah. Well, it's one theory, but
when you ever have something this chaotic, you're always gonna have a bunch of wacky theories.
Yeah, and I get that because you have a lot of people who still refuse to believe that Hamas doesn't give a shit about Palestinians. And again, I keep going back to the same thing, which is take a look at Gaza, and tell me what Hamas has done for the people of Gaza, because again, Palestinian people aren't lined up 100% behind them. In fact, there's been reports of looting of Hamas facilities since they've been losing their grip on power. The Hamas leadership structure is enormously wealthy. Right? They've stolen billions of dollars that was theoretically intended for Palestinian improvements.
Can you explain that? Like, how did they get a hold of the money, and how is the money allocated? Like, say, where's the money coming from when they get money for the improvements in sanitation and education, schools, and all that?
It comes from a variety of sources. Look, I think the EU, the European Union, is, I think, the largest donor still to the Palestinian people, and it comes through various organizations. So, the United Nations, the Refugee Office, UNRW, the USAID, and some NGOs, and quite a few NGOs. So, money is donated or allocated by governments, and the U.S. has given billions of dollars through these organizations for the improvement of Palestinian lives, right? And part of that came out of the Oslo Accord. The idea being, band together, improve the infrastructure for the Palestinians, create this, because that will march towards more stability, and eventually maybe that allows for a solution, that will eventually come about.